Ellington, Connecticut. Just 2 days before Christmas, the silence of this quiet neighborhood was shattered not by holiday cheer, but by the piercing wail of sirens. When police rushed into the Dabate family home, they walked into a nightmare: a wounded man tied to a chair and the lifeless body of his wife, Connie, in the basement. Richard Dabate told a chilling story about a masked giant in camouflage who had broken into their house. The town was paralyzed with fear, but while friends were busy comforting the grieving widower, investigators noticed something off. They realized they had a witness, one that doesn't have emotions and doesn't know how to lie. A witness that had tracked every single second of that morning. How did a tiny device on the victim's wrist expose Richard's double life and turn him from a survivor into the prime suspect? Before we dive in, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out if you enjoy this kind of content. And let me know in the comments, do you think digital evidence can completely replace human testimony in this day and age? Let's get into it. Picture this: Connie Dabate, a vibrant 39-year-old living the suburban dream in Ellington, Connecticut. She shared her life with her 40-year-old husband Richard, and their 2 boys, 9-year-old Richard Jr., better known as RJ, and little 6-year-old Connor. Growing up in a massive, boisterous family back in Rockville, Connie never really outgrew that the more, the merrier vibe. If there was a reason to throw a bash, she was on it. For Connie, nothing beat the high of having her favorite people gathered around a table full of good food, playing games, and just catching up. Whether it was Christmas, New Year's, or Halloween, she was basically a professional party planner in her spare time. You know how people usually lose touch after high school or college? Not Connie. She flat out refused to let those bonds fade, constantly organizing reunions to keep the old gang together. Her energy was off the charts, and she was that ride-or-die friend, the first one to give you solid advice or show up at your door in a heartbeat, no matter how packed her schedule was. The story goes that one summer, she crossed paths with a computer tech named Richard Dabate at a party. On paper, they might have seemed like an odd match, but they just clicked. As people got to know Richard, they realized he was basically a big kid, a total goofball who lived to make people crack up. Since Connie was the exact same way, it was a match made in heaven. When Richard finally brought her home, his mom knew instantly that Connie was the one. On the 4th of July, 2003, they tied the knot and eventually moved into a beautiful house at 7 Birchview Drive, tucked away on a peaceful suburban street. Once RJ and Connor came along, Connie's legendary parties leveled up. We're talking over-the-top props, wild decorations, and insane costumes just to see her kids' faces light up. One Easter, she pulled off the ultimate mom move. She convinced the kids that if they tossed jelly beans into the yard and hit the sack, they'd transform into lollipops by morning. While the boys were dreaming, Connie was out there in the pitch black, raking up jelly beans and planting lollipops everywhere. She was the definition of extra in the best way possible. She'd do absolutely anything to put a smile on someone's face. Fast forward to the 23rd of December 2015. We're just 2 days out from Christmas. The Dabate house was looking like a winter wonderland, and every single gift was already wrapped. Connie was hyped to spend the holidays with her boys. That morning started like any other. She got the kids ready for school, and Richard dropped them off before heading back home to swap into his work gear. Connie, meanwhile, was getting ready to head out for a spin class. But just before 11 a.m., the peace on Birchview Drive was shattered. Neighbors started peeking out their windows and running to their doors as the sound of sirens filled the air. Police cars were flying down the street, racing toward the Dabate residence. A home security alarm had been triggered, followed by a frantic, short-lived 911 call.
911. Hello? No.
Word started hitting the grapevine that a terrifying home invasion had gone down at 7 Birchview Drive. The story was that a masked intruder had jumped Connie and Richard and was now hauled up somewhere or on the run. Cops were going door to door, scouring every nook and cranny of the neighborhood to see if the guy was hiding out nearby. They told everyone to lock themselves in a single room and stay put until they got the green light. People sat in the dark, hearts racing, waiting for the all clear. But the news coming out of the Dabate house was about to get a whole lot darker. When help arrived, they found Richard tied to a chair, bleeding out on the floor with the chair flipped on top of him. Luckily, he was still breathing, and they rushed him to an ambulance in stable condition. Connie, however, didn't make it. She was found in the basement, gone, having been shot in the stomach and the back of the head. Once detectives were sure the coast was clear, they let the neighbors out of their houses. Stepping outside felt like walking onto a movie, set a sea of yellow crime scene tape, flashing blue and reds, and uniforms everywhere. It was surreal, like some twisted plot from a dark TV drama. As soon as Richard was patched up at the hospital, the medical staff gave detectives the go-ahead to talk to him. He was visibly rattled and in total shock, but he walked them through the nightmare that had unfolded that morning. He told them he'd left at 8 a.m. to drop the boys at school and pulled back into the driveway around 8:30 a.m. to grab his work shirt. He saw Connie backing her car out. She was supposed to head to a spin class at the local YMCA, but the session ended up being canceled, so she turned right back around. Richard said he had about a 40-minute commute to his job, but 10 minutes into the drive, he realized his laptop was sitting at home. He pulled a U-turn, and right around that time, he got an alert on his phone someone or something had tripped his home alarm. He fired off a quick email to his boss to say he'd be late, wanting to make sure his house was secure. He got back between 8:45 and 9 a.m., and the second he stepped inside, he heard a noise coming from the second floor. He crept upstairs and came face to face with a massive guy in camo gear and a mask digging through Connie's jewelry box. The intruder pulled a knife and started demanding cash, cards, and pins. Richard said he didn't hesitate and handed over his wallet. Even with the mask, he could tell the guy was a tank about 6'2", stocky, with a deep voice. He actually told investigators the guy reminded him of Vin Diesel. After that, Richard claimed things turned into a total blur. He heard Connie walking through the door and started screaming at the top of his lungs for her to run.
I yelled to her to get out of the house. My wife didn't run. She must have ran into the basement because we have 2 guns in the house. One was in the basement in a lockbox and one's in our closet. She ran downstairs.
Instead of bolting for the exit, Connie sprinted straight for the basement. Richard figured she was probably racing to grab a firearm to defend them both. The intruder didn't hesitate. He went down after her. Just a few minutes later, at roughly 9:05 a.m., 2 gunshots echoed through the house. Richard rushed downstairs only to be met with a nightmare. His wife was lying lifeless on the floor, and the masked man was standing over her, clutching one of Richard's own guns. The killer then turned his attention back to Richard, slicing his legs with a box cutter before zip-tying him to a chair. To top off the brutality, the intruder used a blowtorch to burn him before finally fleeing the scene.
I'm sitting in the chair, I was kind of half tied up, in shock, I guess.
What do you mean half tied up?
I had one leg free and an arm free. He tied one leg, tied one arm, and he tied my neck fairly tight with a tie wrap. And I got a torch to kind of just blow in his mask a little bit, and it caught on fire. He dropped the blowtorch. I was starting to scream for help. I screamed for help. I couldn't hear a soul. I got really, really dizzy.
Richard claimed he actually managed to fight back, grabbing the blowtorch and scorching the attacker's face, which finally sent the guy running. Still bound to that chair, Richard said he somehow hauled himself up the stairs to the kitchen and smashed the panic button on their security system before making a frantic, short 911 call. It was such a cinematic, terrifying tale that detectives were almost overwhelmed trying to find a starting point. They started digging, talking to neighbors and the couple's inner circle. Friends mentioned that Connie and Richard had been locked in a nasty legal battle with a contractor lately. They weren't happy with his work and had actually sued him for a few grand. Not long after, someone smashed the windshield on one of their cars, and Connie was dead certain it was him. She was so rattled that, despite her hating guns, they decided to buy one for protection. Richard bought the piece and kept it in the basement, and ballistics eventually confirmed that was the exact gun used to kill Connie. The cops tracked down the contractor, a guy named Ken. He didn't deny that things had ended on a sour note. He was definitely pissed about losing the lawsuit, but he swore he'd moved on. While the timing was suspicious, the red flags just weren't there. Ken was totally cooperative, letting them search his place and check his tech. He had a clean record, and his physical build and voice didn't match the Vin Diesel description Richard had provided. Plus, since Ken had spent so much time at the house, Richard likely would have recognized his movements, mask or no mask. Ken's alibi held up, and he was officially cleared. The week after Christmas, while everyone else was prepping for New Year's, the Ellington community was gearing up for Connie's wake. Despite the biting cold, the turnout was massive. Hundreds of people lined up for hours to say their goodbyes. Two of Connie's best friends, women who had been in her life for 20 years and had spent countless nights hanging out with the couple, finally reached Richard after waiting 3 hours in line. "So, how do you know my wife?" Richard asked them, his face a total blank. They just stood there, completely floored. At first they chalked it up to the soul-crushing stress of the situation and kept moving, but later they couldn't help but gossip. It wasn't just the memory lapse. They noticed he didn't have a single mark on his face, no bruises, no scratches, nothing. To top it off, Richard pulled a disappearing act, leaving the funeral way earlier than anyone expected.
You'd think that they would have any sort of lead by this point, right?
2 weeks and still no arrest in the murder of a young Ellington mother. 39-year-old Connie Dabate was found dead just before Christmas.
Police responded to her Birchview Drive home after the house alarm was activated. They found her husband, Richard Dabate, injured inside the smoky home. Police later found Connie with gunshot wounds to the head and stomach. Her death ruled a homicide, but police have yet to make an arrest, and they've said there is no threat to the public. Still, the entire situation putting residents around town on edge.
Understandably, Fox 61's Katie Corrado went to Ellington today to get some answers. She joins us now with the very latest. Katie?
Audrey and Brent, this murder happened on December 23rd, and people in town tell me the more time passes without answers, the more the rumor mill seems to churn.
I mean, these guys are like family. You know, these ladies have been coming in forever.
Luann Lanzieri hears a lot of the Ellington town chatter inside her nail salon on West Road.
And there's a lot of rumors going around.
Rumors about the murder of Ellington mom Connie Dabate. And 2 weeks since the crime, there's still been no arrest.
It seems like every day someone's coming in and asking, have you heard anything else? You know, this is what we heard.
Luann says most people are confident the police will find whoever killed her childhood friend.
I grew up with her in Vernon as well when she was little. And she was always a wonderful person, so I hope they find the correct person that did this to her.
The other neighbors we talked to did not want to go on camera, but say it is scary and nerve-wracking to know there has not been an arrest. They say this is what everyone around town is talking about, and they just want an answer. But answers so far are scarce.
The detectives are working very hard. They're waiting for a lot of evidence to come back from the labs. They want all their ducks in a row before they can make a decision of what's going on.
Ellington First Selectman Lori Spielman says she's in touch with police nearly every day and has been told this was an isolated incident.
Any idea when something might be coming?
I don't know, maybe next week, but they are still waiting for some of the evidence to come back from the labs.
We reached out to state police tonight for an update on the investigation, but have not heard back. We also tried contacting Connie's husband, Rick Dabate, but he has not responded.
In the days that followed, Richard seemed, for lack of a better word, chipper. He was hitting up restaurants, grabbing drinks, and even hosting parties at his place, joking around like his world hadn't just imploded. If you didn't know his story, you'd never guess his wife had been murdered, and he'd survived a brutal assault. On Facebook, he played the part of the grieving but resilient dad, posting about staying strong for his boys and thanking everyone for the love. But gossip travels fast in a small town, and people were starting to whisper. Something about his vibe just didn't sit right. Friends, family, and the police were all starting to get a major bad feeling about his version of events. Back at 7 Birchview Drive, the investigation was hitting some snags. None of the neighbors saw or heard a thing, though given how spaced out the houses are, the cops weren't exactly shocked. There were no signs of a break-in, although a basement window was cracked open just enough that it could have been an entry point. Here's the kicker. Nothing was missing. Nothing was even moved. When the canine units arrived, they couldn't catch a whiff of anyone else. In fact, the first dog on the scene kept trying to follow Richard to the ambulance, and 2 other dogs couldn't find a single trace of an intruder leaving the property. That wallet Richard claimed was stolen? It was sitting right outside, totally intact. The murder weapon didn't have a single fingerprint on it, not the intruder's, not Connie's, not even Richard's. As for his wounds, the nurses realized the knife marks were totally superficial. The more Richard talked to the cops, the more his story started to leak. He went from being absolutely sure to a lot of I don't knows. One minute he heard the shots, then he saw the shots, then he didn't hear or see anything at all. He told the first guys on the scene that the killer was still roaming the house, but then told detectives he'd watched the guy bolt. Plus, he claimed the whole thing went down around 9 a.m., yet that 911 call didn't happen until nearly 10:30. On Christmas Eve, just one day after Connie's death, Richard didn't waste any time. He lawyered up. A week later, he filed a claim for Connie's $475,000 life insurance policy and drained $93,000 from an investment account in her name. It turned out the perfect Dabate marriage was a total front. Back in December 2014, Connie had actually started a note on her iPhone titled "Why I Want a Divorce." In it, she vented about Richard's reckless spending, called him an unfit father, and said he treated her with zero affection or attention. Connie's private notes painted a picture of a woman who was done. He takes money from a lot of accounts that don't belong to him, says he's sorry, but takes no responsibility for it. I don't know anything about his day, who he speaks to, or what goes on in his life other than work. I'm tired of covering for him. I'm tired of lying and acting like things are great when they aren't. Connie's private notes were heartbreakingly honest. Under the reasons to stay section, she wrote that when Richard was in a good mood, he was actually fun to be around. She admitted she still found him attractive and felt like she could truly be herself with him. But while Connie was weighing her options, Richard was living a double life. Authorities had been playing their cards close to the chest, but they'd nailed down a motive almost immediately after that first hospital interview. It turned out Richard was stepped out on his marriage with a woman named Sarah, someone he'd known since high school. To make matters even messier, Connie knew her too. Sarah had actually done a reading at their wedding. Richard and Sarah had been an on-again, off-again thing for years, but things heated up big time in May 2015. Just a month later, Sarah dropped a bombshell. She was pregnant. Allegedly, she started putting the squeeze on Richard to finally leave Connie. During that marathon 7-hour interview at the hospital, Richard actually brought Sarah up himself, but he tried to put a bizarre spin on it. He admitted they were sleeping together, but claimed it was purely a favor. According to his wild story, Sarah desperately wanted to be a mom, but couldn't afford the process on her own, so she asked Richard to step in as a sperm donor. He basically tried to frame his infidelity as a weird act of charity.
We were going to donate sperm to her to have a kid.
Richard claimed that since going through a clinic was way too pricey, they decided to handle things, in his own words, the conventional way.
Untraditional, but traditional in the way that the baby was conceived?
Yeah.
Okay.
The investigators pressed him, asking if Connie was actually aware that he was trying to knock Sarah up. Absolutely, Richard shot back. He didn't just claim she was okay with it. He insisted the whole thing was actually Connie's idea.
Do you think your wife had any issues with that?
It was her idea, in a way.
Detectives weren't buying that for a second, especially once they discovered Richard had already confessed to his buddies that the pregnancy was a total oops moment. Realizing his first lie fell flat, Richard pivoted to a second tall tale. He claimed Connie couldn't have any more kids, but still wanted one. So Sarah supposedly volunteered to be their surrogate so all 3 of them could co-parent. After catching the investigators' skeptical looks, Richard was finally backed into a corner. He had to scrap the fantasies and come clean, admitting the pregnancy was a complete accident resulting from a months-long affair.
Was her getting pregnant unexpected?
It was unexpected.
Richard was playing both sides, spinning a web of lies to keep his double life from imploding. He told Connie he was stuck at work or hanging out with the guys, while behind her back, he was pouring his heart out to Sarah, promising her that he was on the verge of filing for divorce. By the time December rolled around, Sarah was only 8 weeks away from giving birth to their daughter. The tension peaked when Richard took Connie on a romantic getaway to Vermont. Connie, totally oblivious, posted photos of the trip to Facebook, which Sarah saw. It was a slap in the face for Sarah, who realized Richard was lying about ending his marriage. Whether Connie ever truly suspected the affair or the pregnancy remains a mystery, but those closest to her are convinced she was in the dark. They insist she would have told someone if she'd known. Regardless of what Connie knew, Richard had apparently decided that the only way to fix the mess he'd made was to get her out of the way permanently and start fresh with Sarah. Investigators found that Richard had actually met with a divorce lawyer back in June 2015, though no official papers were ever filed. His phone was a goldmine of evidence. Just 2 days before the murder, he texted Sarah promising to leave Connie. The very next day, he sent another message telling Sarah he loved her and would see her tomorrow. Meanwhile, Connie's own phone told a different story, showing a heated text argument between her and Richard that same day, where she called him out for lying about a bill. "You lied to me, and I am again cleaning up your mess. Great day off." And Merry Christmas. It will be a very Merry Christmas. Connie had no idea that Richard was running a secret credit card to fund his double life, buying flowers for Sarah, booking hotel rooms, and dropping over $1,000 at a strip club. Even more chilling, his search history revealed he'd been looking up deadly over-the-counter combinations, fast, untraceable homemade poison, and tasteless poison easily available. If that wasn't damning enough, the smoking gun was about to emerge, though it took some time for investigators to piece the digital puzzle together. As 2016 rolled into the spring of 2017, the investigation pivoted to a piece of tech Connie wore every single day, her Fitbit. Because she was so active, she never took it off, and the data stored on that device told a story that completely trashed Richard's version of events. Police already knew he'd waited over an hour to call 911, but they could have potentially chalked that up to shock or a fuzzy memory. However, when they synced the Fitbit data with CCTV, computer logs, and house alarm records, the real timeline of that morning came into focus, and it was a total game changer. At 8:26 a.m., while Richard claimed he was commuting to work, he was actually sitting at home, scrolling through Facebook. At 8:41 a.m., there was a login to Outlook from his home computer. Richard's story was that he'd rushed home to find an intruder just as Connie was returning and getting shot, but the digital trail said otherwise. At 8:46 a.m., Connie's Fitbit showed her leaving for her spin class. Just 1 minute later, Richard was messing with the home alarm system, eventually disarming it at 8:50 before rearming it 9 minutes later. At 8:53 a.m., Connie arrived at the YMCA, and a few minutes later, she messaged her therapist on Facebook. At 9:04 a.m., Richard fired off that email to his boss, the one he claimed he sent from the side of the road, but his IP address proved he was still sitting inside the house. By 9:18 a.m., Richard was actually browsing the YMCA website, likely checking Connie's schedule. At 9:23 a.m., the garage door opened, and Connie's Fitbit registered her coming home. From 9:40 to 9:46 a.m., she was back on Facebook. It appeared that while Connie was relaxing, Richard was likely figuring out how to lure her into the basement. The Fitbit recorded Connie's very last movements at 10:05 a.m. 7 minutes later, at 10:12, the panic alarm was triggered using Richard's keychain fob. The cold, hard data proved Connie was alive and well for about an hour after Richard claimed she had been murdered. Not a single part of his story held water. He never left the house, the timings were a complete fabrication, and her heart rate never showed the spikes you'd see if she were running for her life from a killer. Finally, in April 2017, the hammer dropped.
Husband arrested, charged with murdering his wife more than a year ago.
Connie Dabate, an Ellington mother of two, brutally murdered in her home 2 days before Christmas. Well, tonight, finally, a break in that case. A newly released 50-page arrest warrant revealing what was happening inside that home, inside that marriage.
Yeah, we also have this exclusive video showing Mr. Dabate being transported by state police tonight.
The hammer finally dropped in April 2017 when Richard was taken into custody. He was slapped with a laundry list of charges, including murder, tampering with evidence, and lying through his teeth to the police.
Grant says Dabate is being held under a $1 million bond and is scheduled to appear in court on Monday. State police say the investigation turned over every stone.
It's very important to follow all leads, follow all evidence, speak to all witnesses, any potential suspects. This is about the victim.
Grant says the lengthy investigation was a collaborative effort from several factions of law enforcement. She claims it was necessary to be extremely thorough during the process in order to prevent possible mistrials in the future. Community members reacting to the arrest of Rick Dabate right in their own backyard.
Anytime somebody loses their life is unfortunate, especially when it's divested.
Friday afternoon, neighbors say 40-year-old Dabate was pulling onto the family street when he was served an arrest warrant for the murder of his wife, Connie. And now community members feel justice is on the horizon.
They wouldn't bring the case up if they didn't really have a lot of evidence that it was the husband.
Evidence that took nearly a year and a half to gather. Community members say the lengthy investigation is a positive.
Nowadays, the police, they got to cross every T and dot every I before they can come after you, really, or they can blow the whole case. A good lawyer will get them off.
Fortunately, you have a murderer running around the streets if it's supposed to be him, but, the good side about that means they did a thorough investigation. So hopefully, like I said, justice be served.
Still, people in town are still shaken by the crime.
It's kind of a dangerous world, rough world, dangerous country. You got to watch your back.
Now, we reached out to Dabate's attorney tonight, and he just sent us this statement, which reads, "My client is innocent of these charges, and he looks forward to be vindicated after trial."
He managed to post his $1 million bail and walked free while waiting for his day in court. During that time, he was actually co-parenting the daughter he had with Sarah. Tragedy hit the family again in 2019 when Connie's father passed away. He'd been battling illness for a long time, fueled by the sheer determination to see justice served for his daughter. Her brother later said his body just finally gave out. He died without ever seeing his daughter's killer behind bars. The trial was supposed to kick off in April 2020, but the universe seemed to have other plans. Just as the jury was being picked, the pandemic hit, and then Richard's lawyer passed away, pushing everything back even further. It wasn't until April 2022 that the trial finally got underway more than 6 years after Connie was taken.
A murder trial that has gained worldwide attention. Now, cameras are not allowed in the courtroom for this trial, but we are allowed to sit in and listen. The now former detective told jurors that Richard Dabate gave law enforcement consent to search his Ellington home, his iPhone, and also allow them to swab him for DNA and gunshot residue. The state presented other evidence, including photographs of Richard Dabate's injuries while he was in his hospital bed, along with clothing, his hospital socks, and a shoe that had blood on it. Dabate's attorney had this to say outside the courtroom today.
As the trial's ongoing, we would love to make comments day to day as each piece of evidence comes in, explain our defense and explain our side. But what we need to do is respect the process here.
Now, that Fitbit that we've been talking about, that hasn't been mentioned in court just yet, but I'm sure it will be brought up. Tomorrow, though, the jury is expected to listen to the rest of that 4-hour recording. We are live from Rockville. Courtney Zeller, Channel 3 Eyewitness News.
The courtroom was flooded with over 600 pieces of evidence and testimony from more than 130 witnesses, Richard included. His defense team tried to play the tunnel vision card, arguing that the cops had a bone to pick with Richard from day one and just manipulated the timeline to frame him. But honestly, that didn't hold water. The investigators had chased down every single lead he threw at them, including the contractor, and cleared every one of them. When you piled that on top of the digital trail, the clean crime scene, the K9S coming up empty, and the massive holes in his shifting stories, all roads led back to him. Richard's lawyers tried to distract the jury with talk of unidentified DNA found in the house and on the murder weapon. They even brought up a house cleaner who claimed to see a dark figure near the window. However, prosecutors painted a much more realistic picture. Richard was a ticking time bomb who had backed himself into a corner. They argued he didn't want a divorce because he couldn't stand the thought of his reputation being trashed or losing his social circle. Between the looming financial hit and the messy custody battle over RJ and Connor, Richard saw murder as his only way out.
Now, 4 weeks into the trial, one of Connie's sisters took the stand today, saying the family learned she was shot only after a family meeting was held at their parents' home, a day after she was killed. And Richard Dabate was there. She says when he arrived at the home, she heard him say, "I didn't do it. There was someone in the house. They said I need a lawyer." She also says Richard Dabate needed help getting into the house. He looked distraught, physically ill, and it appeared he had been crying. The family gathered around the kitchen table, and she told jurors Richard Dabate told them the story about what happened. He told the family he retained a lawyer, and the lawyer told him not to talk about anything, but believed he owed them an explanation. Connie's sister and her brother-in-law, who also testified today, says Richard Dabate showed no emotion when he told the story. Connie's sister says Richard Dabate mentioned a trip the family was supposed to take after the holidays, going to Great Wolf Lodge, and that he will have to find someone to go with. 7 people who live or lived in the Ellington neighborhood at the time of the crime also testified, saying they didn't see anything out of the ordinary that day.
And the judge mentioned in court today that they are hoping to conclude the state's case by the middle of next week. There is no court tomorrow. It will pick back up on Friday.
Richard took the stand and owned up to the affair, describing himself as a man who was deeply in love with 2 different women and felt completely suffocated by the situation. He insisted that being a cheater didn't make him a murderer, claiming he missed Connie every single day and would never put his sons through such a nightmare. Then Sarah testified, and her story didn't exactly match the pressure Richard had hinted at. She told the court she had no intention of blowing up the Dabate family. In fact, she said she was perfectly fine raising her daughter solo, and wouldn't have even put Richard's name on the birth certificate if he decided to stick it out with Connie. Through tears, she admitted she was deeply ashamed of the whole mess, but swore she never leaned on Richard to walk away from his marriage. She testified that they never once discussed hurting Connie, and Richard had never confessed to the murder. After 5 grueling weeks, both sides rested their cases in May 2022.
Guilty on all counts. A jury has reached a verdict in the Richard Dabate murder trial.
Mark and Aaron, a lot of surprise here at the courthouse. The jury probably deliberated for at the most 3 hours. Richard and Connie's families had emotional reactions as the verdict was read.
Connie was essentially sentenced to death, while this convicted murderer has been living his life while out on parole for 6.5 years. There will be no closure for the Margada family, but there is finally justice for Connie.
She was a terrific sister, mother, daughter. I loved her. I remember when she was born, I'm 10 years older. My father brought me to the hospital to see her for the first time, and the nurse held her up to the window. And that was very memorable, seeing the new baby for the first time.
Richard's defense team said they're prepared to keep fighting for their client.
They only started about 24 hours ago, and it was a 5-week trial, so I'd say we were a bit surprised. I think all 3 of us, very disappointed with the outcome. It's been a lot of effort, an exhaustive case, but again, we're going to have more filings. We'll say more on those. Thank you. Thank you, Trent.
First up right now at 4, we start with some breaking news this afternoon. The man convicted in the Fitbit murder trial will spend 65 years in prison. Thanks for joining us today.
Richard Dabate was slapped with a 6-5-year prison sentence, with the judge blasting his actions as brutal, cold-blooded, and completely incomprehensible. His maximum release date isn't until May 2087. Before they hauled him off, he made one last plea, maintaining his innocence and swearing he'd never stop fighting for justice for Connie, the woman he claims to think about every single day. To this day, his parents are still in his corner. They find it impossible to wrap their heads around the idea that, just 2 days before Christmas, he could lure his wife into the basement, execute her, stage a crime scene, and then just carry on with his life like it was nothing. Despite the mountain of evidence, Richard isn't backing down. In October 2024, he officially filed an appeal against his conviction.
Defense attorney for Richard Dabate, Trent Lalima, addressing 6 justices in a room full of UConn law students, claiming the state prosecutor Matthew Gdansky engaged in a pattern of impropriety that denied Dabate a fair trial.
Perhaps some of the most damaging would be the ticking time bomb question, which was 24 hours, almost exactly 24 hours. After that, those notes had been excluded by the trial court. The state asked, did you feel like a ticking time bomb? I mean, ticking time bomb makes my client out to be a dangerous person.
I don't think that there is anything improper at all about using the defendant's own words in a prior inconsistent statement to impeach his testimony when she testifies.
Isn't this supposed to be a fair trial, not a gamesmanship episode?
As of the recording of this episode, the case is still sitting with the Connecticut Supreme Court. In so many of the stories we dive into, it's chilling how some people convince themselves that murder is the only exit strategy, the only logical way to solve their problems. To them, it actually makes sense in the moment, and they seem totally disconnected from the massive wave of trauma and destruction they're about to leave behind. Today, Connie's sister, Leslie, is the one raising the boys. Because of the web of lies Richard spun about a masked intruder, RJ, and Connor grew up terrified that a stranger might break in at any moment. They are only now beginning to process the crushing reality of what their father actually did to their mother. Connie's mom still clings to the memory of their very last phone call. She clearly remembers Connie picking up the phone and saying, "Mom, I love you. You're my best friend." That was Connie in a nutshell, a genuinely kind, nurturing soul who spent her life making sure everyone around her felt like they truly mattered. Her best friend Kim put it best. "I miss her laugh. I miss the way she made me feel. I miss the energy and fun she brought into my life and everyone else's. I miss everything. I miss every single thing about her."